Well, hope you had a great start to June. You're watching Weekly News Highlights, where we bring you some of the biggest stories that made the headlines this week. I'm Song Yoo-jin, coming to you from Arirang's virtual studio. We start this week in Korea, where the country hosted the first ever Korea-Africa Summit. Delegations from 48 African nations came together in Korea for the two-day event. What were the key discussions and outcomes from this landmark summit? Moving on, South Korea has decided to suspend the 2018 Inter-Korean Agreement that was initially signed to reduce military tensions on the Korean Peninsula. This move came after a series of provocations from North Korea continuing from last week. What does this mean for the already tense situation on the peninsula? Finally, Korea is set to start drilling for a potential billion-barrel oil and gas reserve in the East Sea later this year. What are the prospects, and what could this mean for one of the world's largest energy importers? Well, this week, South Korea held its first ever summit with African countries, 48 of which participated in the leaders' meeting and business summit. For a recap of the major achievements and a closer look at the significance of the summit, we're joined by our presidential office correspondent, Oh Soo-young, once again. Welcome back, Soo-young.
It's great to be here, Yoo-jin.
So, Soo-young, starting off, one of the key takeaways was the agreement to establish a critical minerals dialogue between Korean and African countries. So I want to ask you, what is the significance of cooperating on critical minerals?
Well, that's a great question, Yoo-jin. It's significant for both countries because, starting with South Korea, its foremost high-tech industries, namely semiconductors, depend on a stable supply of core minerals like copper, iron ore, nickel, lithium and cobalt. Semiconductors make up 20% of Korea's exports, which in turn accounted for roughly 86% of last year's economic growth, according to the Korea International Trade Association. However, as of 2022, Korea has only 36 mineral mines compared to the nearly 2,000 in the United States and 134 in Japan. That's why establishing a critical minerals dialogue with Africa was a key achievement, along with bilateral memorandums of understanding on critical mineral cooperation with Tanzania and Madagascar. Zimbabwe and Liberia are also looking to work together in the field. Now it's a win-win partnership, as South Korea would provide investment and job opportunities in African countries, which hold around 30% of the world's critical mineral reserves. Amid the geopolitical rivalry, of course, to tap into these resources, South Korea really stands out, as it would not simply extract them, but it would help the industry grow sustainably in these fields.
Right, and on that note, South Korea signed deals to assist development in other respects. Now, Soo-young, you covered the multilateral meeting for us, and now the bilaterals have also wrapped up, right?
Yes, exactly. So beyond the multilateral joint statement, President Yoon Suk-yeol held bilateral summits with 25 African nations to work on more customized measures for cooperation. Seoul will help develop infrastructure, including roads, rail, ports and smart cities in countries like Ghana, Lesotho and Rwanda. It signed deals on procuring clean energy sources to help power the growth of African industries. And to strengthen food security, Korea will share knowledge and technology to upgrade farming and agriculture. Now, this includes cultivating high-quality rice for its so-called K-Rice Belt project in Madagascar, Sierra Leone and Guinea-Bissau. Now, cooperation on maritime security, fisheries, digital technology and human resources training as well would help countries like Mauritania and Mozambique develop their industrial capacity and productivity. Also, based on Korea's own experience of developing from one of the world's poorest countries to an economic powerhouse, its Semao or New Village movement will be shared with countries like Equatorial Guinea and the Central African Republic. To help drive progress in these areas, Seoul agreed to pursue trade and investment frameworks for 6 countries and inked a trade cooperation MOU with the 54-member African Union. Now, it also plans to provide $14 billion in export financing to Korean firms over the next 6 years to encourage business in Africa. And President Yoon has said Korea will continue to expand foreign aid or official development assistance to $10 billion by 2030 as a catalyst for cooperation projects with Africa. Now, that's more than double the country's total ODA budget with this year, which was $4.8 billion.
Right, so that aligns with shared growth and sustainability, which were the themes of the summit, as well as solidarity too.
That's right. So both South Korea and African countries face regional and global challenges to their security and growth. And Seoul is a major contributor to UN peacekeeping missions and supports efforts for peace by the African Union amid internal conflicts and violence across the continent. Meanwhile, for South Korea, working with Africa is really crucial as it has 54 votes in the United Nations, which is more than any other continent. And around 40% of the UN Security Council's agendas are related to Africa. Now, as South Korea serves a non-permanent term in the Security Council, there is a great need for cooperation on these issues as well as issues of Korea's own interest.
In order for us to take the lead in the shaping discussions on the peace and security on the Korean Peninsula, as well as around the world, we need support from African countries. Korea aspires to become a global people state, which actively harnesses Korea's growing, strengthening, and capability in advancing freedom, peace, and prosperity in the international community. So we recognize the importance of the supporting African leadership and ownership in securing sustainable peace in Africa. Korea is committed to strengthening the capacity of the African Union and sub-regional organizations. The Korean government has contributed over $18 million since 2016 to support the AU peace and security activities.
Countries like the United States, Japan, China and Russia have already been holding summits with Africa, so we are a little late to the game. However, you can't help but notice the very high turnout of 48 countries. Now, that's all the African Union countries, excluding the 6 that are currently suspended after military coups took over their governments.
I believe that the very reason African nations are attending this summit is because African countries are expressing their steadfast trust and gratitude towards South Korea.
With 33 heads of state having travelled to the summit, there was high anticipation for building stronger relations with South Korea, shown by the sheer volume of the bilaterals held on the side. This summit aimed to set the institutional framework for the cooperation to really take off with various dialogue mechanisms such as in agriculture and economic cooperation. And a foreign ministerial meeting will be held in 2 years' time to evaluate the progress made by that point. And, well, we're really going to have to see what happens. But as President Yoon said, the summit takes Korea-Africa relations to a new level as they seek to face and overcome shared challenges together.
All right, thanks for your report today, Soyeon. We really appreciate it this week as well.
All right, thanks for having me in studio.
Now, continuing our coverage with the Korea-Africa Summit, the highlight of the second and last day was the Korea-Africa Business Summit. Both sides pledged to boost economic cooperation by launching a joint committee. Our economics correspondent Lee Soo-jin spoke with one of the event speakers about what lies ahead for their cooperation.
South Korea and Africa will establish a joint economic committee to further promote trade between them. The agreement was made in an MOU signed on Wednesday between the Korea International Trade Association and the African Continental Free Trade Area at the 2024 Korea-Africa Business Summit. The event, held in Seoul by South Korea's Trade Ministry, was attended by more than 400 people, including heads of state, business leaders, and economic experts. They discussed key issues such as industrial development, trade expansion, food and mineral security, and climate change. President Yoon Suk-yeol, in his keynote speech, highlighted Africa's vast potential.
2021년 아프리카 대륙 자유무역지대 출범으로 이제 아프리카는 세계 최대 단일 시장으로 발전하고 있습니다. 경제인 여러분께서도 한-아프리카 경제협력위원회를 중심으로 민간 교류를 더욱 활발히 추진해 주시기를 부탁드립니다.
We sat down with the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area, who's also one of the speakers, and he emphasized the African Union and South Korea's shared trade and investment opportunities, such as in the auto industry.
If you take, for example, the auto sector, the African continent by the year 2035 will require 5 million units of vehicles per year produced in Africa. Today we are at 1.2 million units of vehicles per year produced in Africa. That means that there's an opportunity to invest to manufacture 4 million units of vehicles by the year 2035. It's an opportunity for Hyundai, for Kia, all of the big auto manufacturers of Korea. It's an
The AFCFTA, one of the biggest, I think, asset of that is that it's one of the biggest single markets. What is South Korea's role in this, and why is it so important and beneficial to have a single large market?
What we propose to South Korea is an alternative market, a fast, dynamic alternative market for export, for investment. Any country, it is in any country's interests to have a diversified export market and to have a diversified investment market. And so that's what we're offering.
He added that through the Joint Economic Committee, South Korea and Africa will identify beneficial projects in a wide range of areas, including minerals, the digital economy, and infrastructure. 이수진, Arirang News.
And to ensure ongoing cooperation, it's crucial to involve the younger generation. The Korea-Africa Youth Startup Forum took place in Seoul on the summit's last day, helping young entrepreneurs from both regions network and exchange ideas. Our An Sung-jin covered the event on site.
Under the theme of The Future We Make Together, Shared Growth, Sustainability, and Solidarity, the 2024 Korea-Africa Summit held a wide range of events, and the Youth Startup Forum was one of them. Organized by South Korea's Foreign Ministry, SMEs and Startups Ministry, and the Korea-Africa Foundation, it shared success stories of innovative young entrepreneurs from Korea and Africa.
Africa is a young continent with more than 2/3 of the population under the age of 30. It is looking to solve social problems through innovative and creative ideas. Africa is emerging as a startup powerhouse and is a reliable partner for shared growth.
The 2024 Korea-Africa Youth Startup Forum aims to be a platform for stakeholders such as investors and young startups to build network and exchange ideas. Discussions were held on key policies based on current investment trends in Africa and ways to strengthen cooperation between Korean and African startup companies. More than 200 attendees, including high-ranking officials, public officers, and those from the academia, participated. A member from a fintech startup based in Africa shared her perspective on the rising collaboration.
Startups are focusing on energy, and then because of the youthful population, is also a service-oriented organization. So service in terms of food, manufacturing, even I said logistics, so mobility. Those are the areas that we have seen people coming, look at the problem very critically because
Governmental organizations are also looking to establish partnerships and strengthen innovation for startups.
We have been working to meet other startup ecosystem development partners to establish linkages that can allow us to connect Korea startups to the Kenyan ecosystem and as well find opportunities for Kenya startups in the Korean market. We believe there are opportunities for funding, for networking, for investments, and as well for scaling up the businesses in both countries.
The forum also shared successful cases of African countries that have benchmarked South Korea's startup ecosystem by fostering a youth training academy program, and it is hoped that the forum will lead to the further development of those ties. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
Shifting focus, tensions on the Korean Peninsula escalated further this week, starting with North Korea sending balloons filled with garbage into the south again. In response, Seoul on Tuesday decided to fully suspend the 2018 inter-Korean military agreement until, quote, mutual trust is restored. Our North Korean affairs correspondent Kim Jong-sil explains the decision and its implications.
President Yoon Suk-yeol has signed the motion that was passed by the cabinet meeting on Tuesday morning to suspend all clauses of the 2018 inter-Korean military agreement.
The government has decided to suspend all effectiveness of the September 19th military agreement until mutual trust between the two Koreas is restored, effective Tuesday, June 4th, as of 3 p.m., after the decision of the cabinet and the president's approval.
The 2018 Inter-Korean military agreement was aimed at diffusing military tensions and preventing accidental military conflict at the border. But military officials, including South Korea's defense minister, have argued that the agreement compromises South Korean military readiness.
Since signing the agreement, North Korea has deliberately and repeatedly conducted violations and provocations, including firing artillery shells off the coast, firing missiles beyond the NLL, firing at guard posts, and infiltrating with small unmanned aerial vehicles.
Back in November, North Korea declared a virtual termination of the September 19 military agreement. This came after Seoul partially suspended a clause on aerial reconnaissance following North Korea's launch of a military spy satellite the night before.
Despite North Korea's repeated violations and provocations, our military has continued to abide by the agreement. However, since failing to launch the military reconnaissance satellites back on May 27th, the North has launched missiles, sent large-scale balloons carrying waste, and jammed GPS systems, gravely threatening the safety of our people and causing property damage.
The deputy minister added that the North Korean regime is solely responsible for the turn of events and warned of a firm response should the North engage in further provocations. With the suspension in effect, the deputy minister hinted of the possible resumption of military drills near the military demarcation line and the Northwest Islands. Such drills had been restricted by the agreement. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
And a day after President Yoon signed the suspension of that inter-Korean agreement, the United States flew one of its long-range B-1B bombers over the Korean Peninsula on Wednesday as part of a joint exercise with the South Korean Air Force. The Ministry of National Defense said the bomber dropped joint direct attack munitions during the combined drill for the first time in 7 years. This has been reported to be a response to the North's recent provocations, including sending trash-filled balloons over the border and a warning against any further aggressive behavior. The Defense Ministry also said the exercise demonstrated the U.S. extended deterrence commitment to South Korea and strengthened their joint defense readiness. And taking the government's decision to suspend all clauses of the 2018 Inter-Korean military agreement, the South Korean military will soon resume drills in areas near the military demarcation line and the Northwest Islands. According to officials on Wednesday, Marines deployed to the Northwest Islands will resume their K-9 self-propelled artillery drills this month for the first time in nearly 6 years. Army drills within 5 kilometers of the MDL and near the northern limit line would also resume shortly. And the North's provocations are a shared concern globally. U.S. President Joe Biden, in a recent interview, called the regime's nuclear capabilities threatening and problematic. Lee Si-hoo has more.
U.S. President Joe Biden, in an interview with Time magazine last week, said that North Korea's nuclear program is equally as threatening as it was before. When asked whether the situation was getting worse, he added he does not think it's more threatening. The president said that, quote, as long as there are nuclear weapons available, it's always going to be a problem, adding that former U.S. President Donald Trump was wrong in not wanting to work early on 5 years ago. When asked if it's American policy to live with a nuclear or near-nuclear Iran and North Korea, Biden confirmed that it isn't. President Biden further mentioned his visit to South Korea, quote, to reclaim the chips industry, and said the U.S. has secured $865 billion in private sector investments during his presidency. The interview took place at the White House on May 28th, where Biden spoke extensively about his foreign policy agenda. Its full transcript was released on Tuesday. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
And voicing such concerns, South Korea, the United States, and Japan on Tuesday strongly condemned North Korea at a regular board meeting of the International Atomic Energy Agency. In a joint statement, the three countries expressed, quote, serious concerns about the ongoing launch of ballistic missiles, including military reconnaissance satellites, adding that they are cautious about the possibility of additional provocations, including a 7th nuclear test. The statement also raised the issue of military cooperation between Pyongyang and Moscow, including the transfer of ballistic missiles and other weapons. Now, this is the second time the three countries have issued a joint condemnation of North Korea at the IAEA. In other news, Korea has long been heavily dependent on energy imports due to a lack of domestic natural resources. However, that could change. President Yoon Suk-yeol gave the green light on Monday for the drilling of a potentially vast oil and gas reserve under the East Sea. Our Moon Hae-ryun walks us through the plan and its anticipated outcomes.
During a press briefing on Friday, Vitor Abreu, the founder of and current advisor at ActGeo, explained that the firm was contracted by the state-run Korean National Oil Corporation last year, after discovering that a sink had 2 of the 4 elements needed for the presence of fossil fuels, one being sand to create a porous environment for oil to accumulate in a reservoir, and the second being mud to trap the oil, called a seal. The basin had 3 wells that had previously been drilled by KNOC in 2012, 2015 and 2021, 2 in cooperation with an independent Australian petroleum exploration company. Abreu said that in identifying why these 3 wells failed to procure results, ActGeo was able to identify the presence of all 4 elements in the basin.
Because we have the wells, we actually prove the existence of the 4 main elements of the petroleum systems in this basin.
He further explained that there were 7 prospects that could lead up to 14 billion barrels of natural gas and oil, and the estimated likelihood of successfully drilling in these locations was 20%. This means that for every 5 of these locations drilled, 1 of them is likely to yield results. According to Abreu, this possibility is higher than the average for similar frontier basins.
And the only way to test that now is for drilling. The prospects are ready to drill. They show all the elements. There's still risk, but it's unsolvable risk at this point. So the only way to unrisk it is by drilling.
And that's just for now, claiming that they could potentially find more drilling sites that could yield economic quantities of hydrocarbons. Responding to questions about his firm's headquarters being registered at a residential home and the small number of workers causing concerns over the reliability of results, he said that while the firm was registered to a residential home, its teams were spread around the world, which is why there has been no need for one specific office. He claimed that ActGeo has teams in New Zealand, Brazil, Mexico, Switzerland, Houston, and that a new branch has recently opened in London. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
And moving on to the domestic economy, Korea's GDP and GNI both saw increases in the first quarter of this year. The GDP recorded the largest on-quarter hike in over 2 years, driven by a rise in construction investment and exports. Here's our Moon Hae-ryun once again.
South Korea's economy expanded in the first quarter to show promising growth on the back of booming exports. According to data released by the Bank of Korea on Friday, the country's gross domestic product grew 1.3% on quarter between January and March, the same as the advanced estimate given at the end of April. This is the largest on-quarter hike recorded in over 2 years, breaking a sluggish growth trend of below 1%. A downturn in exports led to a contraction of 0.5% in the fourth quarter of 2022, but immediately bounced back up to record 5 straight quarters of growth. Construction investment saw a large rise due to recovery in civil and building construction, jumping by 3.3%. A turnaround in semiconductor exports was also reflected in the latest data, with the IT sector and petroleum goods contributing to the overall rise of 1.8% for exports. Government consumption also expanded by 0.8% on the back of increased expenditure on goods. However, facility investment fell by 2%, while imports also dropped by 0.4% on the back of lower natural gas prices. Meanwhile, the country's gross national income, the total earned by people and businesses, was up 2.4% from the fourth quarter of last year. Net foreign income, calculated by subtracting the income earned by foreigners in the country from the total income earned by Koreans from foreign sources, tallied up to the same as the previous quarter. The agency explained that the GNI overall saw a rise due to improving trade conditions, which reduced trade losses for the country. The topic of when and how the country's GNI per capita will surpass $40,000 has been raised for some time now, after $36,194 was recorded in 2023. A spokesperson from the agency said this.
It's difficult to say exactly when we'll reach that goal because D&I per capita is dependent on so many factors such as real income, GDP deflator, inward and outward remittances, and the foreign exchange market. But should the country's currency stabilize, we predict that it should be possible within a few years.
As of 2023, the country ranked 6th in the world in terms of GNI per capita, between Italy and Taiwan. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
Shifting gears, a groundbreaking achievement in space this week. China's Chang'e 6 unmanned spacecraft successfully dug up the world's first samples from the unexplored far side of the moon. According to the China National Space Administration, the samples have been transferred from the sender to the spacecraft's returner.
We aim to understand the topography and material structure of the lunar South Pole and hope to see whether there is water ice at the South Pole. We will also use the moon as an ideal platform to conduct a large-scale survey of our terrestrial space and explore the environmental features between the moon and the Earth. Most importantly, we will do some technical experiments on how to use the in-situ resources on the moon.
Now, if the returner successfully lands on Earth, expected around June 25th, experts say this could give Beijing a head start in lunar exploration. A growing number of countries are diving into this competition after sensing potential economic opportunities, such as securing access to resources. The United States, for example, the world's longtime dominant space superpower, aims to land its astronauts on the moon again by 2026 and build a scientific base camp there, while China plans to put astronauts on the moon by 2030. How will this new space race play out? We'll have to wait and see. We end this week in Mexico, where history has been made. Mexico is set to welcome its first ever female president. Lee Seung-jae reports on the landslide victory and her inspiring story.
For the first time in the 200 years since Mexico became a republic, a female president is set to take office in the country. Preliminary data from the National Electoral Institute showed that Claudia Sheinbaum won between 58.3% to 60.7% of the vote to win the country's presidential election. The 61-year-old takes over her longtime political ally and mentor, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. She also becomes the first Jewish leader of Mexico, having been born to Lithuanian and Bulgarian Jewish parents. A climate scientist, Sheinbaum was also the mayor of Mexico City from 2018 to 2023. Many political pundits see her as continuing the work of Obrador, whose social welfare programs led to the success of the Morena party. The president-elect pledged to stick to her predecessor's policies, which include scholarships for more than 12 million students and pensions for all senior citizens. Sunday's election was also the largest in the country's history, with more than 98 million voters registered. She will begin her 6-year term on October 1st. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
And that's all we have for weekly news highlights for this first week of June. Thank you for the privilege of your time and hope you have a great rest of the weekend.